Welcome to Creative Coffee, a podcast where creative people talk about their creative efforts and what inspires them over a cup of coffee. Today I'm talking with Nancy, a children's book author who recently published her first book, Sassy, the Green Tree Boa. We have our coffee, and I just want to jump in and have a conversation with Nancy. So, Nancy, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, David, for having me.
So, what inspired you to write a children's book?
Well, there's a backstory to it. So, in the year 2000 and 2006,
Okay.
I had my own environmental education program dealing with the importance of native New England snakes. All that time, I went to the school with snakes to the kids and everything else like that. But for the younger kids, never really had anything to introduce them to snakes in a non-threatening way because, as we know, snakes are not well received by just about everybody. And everybody thinks they're scary and everything else like that. So that's kind of the backstory. So I recently took a trip to New Mexico and met a great guy down at the National Rattlesnake Museum. Kind of reignited my passion for snakes and education and environmental education. But I didn't want to go back into having a lot of snakes and all that. So it struck me that the one thing that I really wanted to do was get the younger kids interested in snakes.
Right.
So that's kind of how it all started. Just thinking about writing a story for children that they could laugh and have fun with. But each of the pages of the book has a little piece of education about each snake in the book.
So I read the book and I picked up on that. And I was just like, okay, I see what she's doing here.
Yep.
And your use of, rhythm and rhyming was very clever.
Yep.
So, I recently, wrote a book as well.
Yes.
And it's very different.
It is.
And I think they present different challenges in different ways.
Absolutely.
So, with children's book, it's words, it's tone, as well as visuals. So what were some of the challenges that you faced when you were working on them?
The challenges I faced were really picking which snake. Some of them came to me quite quickly, the ones that I wanted to put in the book. But then making it still have that rhymey repetitiveness because I knew I was concentrating on younger children and not to make it too wordy. That was the hardest thing, to really not make it so wordy that keep that true kind of like picture book aspect of it rather than, as yours is, a novel.
Right.
Yeah.
So why a green tree boa for Sassy? Just curious. Is that your favorite snake?
I would have to say the green tree boa is one of my favorite snakes. They are absolutely beautiful. And I thought the play on words with the tree in its name, it is actually an emerald green tree boa. It kind of just flowed right into the story of like, why, the tree boa. What is that what tree? It never really says what tree. Of course, it's all trees because snakes can climb. So I just kind of played on the actual name of the tree boa.
Okay. And so one of the things that's like really important for me in terms of literature and books and novels is, art design. So for me, for my book, I was very focused on the cover design
which is absolutely gorgeous,
and a map inside. So I hired an illustrator to do the cover illustration on my book because I wasn't up to that level. I did the map inside my book, but your book, I mean, it's one illustration after another, after another,
yes,
after another. So kind of walk me through your process of, the illustrations that you drew, what, how they changed from the initial concepts to what was ending up in the final book.
So I have it. So I'm more of an artistic person to begin with.
Okay.
So the pictures came actually a little easier than the words did. So I would sit down, as you can see, this is my cover. This was my original design of my cover and everything. So it kind of really got me started. And as I'm sketching and drawing, the words would just come to me. So each of the pictures, you can see, they're exactly the same. They just kind of AI enhanced them in the book a little bit. Really, that was it. I love sketching and drawing, knowing a lot about snakes. I tried to incorporate as many as their real characteristics as possible into each snake. Like the diamondback rattlesnake. You get a diamondback rattlesnake, and everybody kept saying, well, why'd you make him a zebra at the end of his tail? And I'm like, because that's
anatomically correct.
It's anatomically correct. And that's what you will know it's a diamondback rattlesnake if you see that black and white stripe right towards the end of the tail before the rattle. So that's kind of how it all came about with the illustrations.
So
yeah.
So Nancy just showed her original illustrations, and they are different than what's in the book. Now, I know that you actually have a publisher.
Yes.
And you work with them. Did they hire artists to redraw the artwork, or did they just take the original and just kind of build upon it and like kind of redraw, but use yours as a basis?
So Austin Macaulay, they do have illustrators, but I was kind of adamant. I really liked my illustrations.
Okay.
So their illustrator worked with my drawings. I submitted all my illustrations to them, and then they would send me a proof of what their illustrator incorporated into my pictures.
Okay.
And I was pleasantly pleased with all of the ones. They really, stuck to my true illustrations as much as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of want to dive into a little bit of your process. So I'm a little bit of a software junkie. I like having software to do certain things, specific things. So like when I write, I'm using a program called Scrivener. It's just a raw copy editor, like writing tool. It allows me to move things around, do a bunch of stuff, but it's just raw text.
Yep.
And then for the composition of my book, I actually use another piece of software. So I'm not sure if you know this, but as a background, I'm a graphic artist and I'm a UX designer.
Oh, wow.
So I dabble in user experience. It does help. So I did the logo for Kyra. I did the whole book layout, everything. I researched everything for probably 4 or 5 months as I was writing, like what are the best tools? What are the best platforms? I ended up getting Vellum, which everybody says is like for an indie author, somebody looking to produce like a book, like a novel. It's the Ferrari of the software. It's the easiest to use. It does the work for you. I could have used a page layout application such as InDesign or something that's really meant for big, long graphical stuff. But I didn't want to spend weeks laying out a book. Vellum just took it and just took my raw file and said, here's your book. And then I just kind of moved things around a little bit. It saved me probably 3 weeks worth of work.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good way to do.
So what software tools do you use?
Well, David, I'm a dinosaur. I started off with a notebook and a pen.
Okay.
And I literally wrote it, rewrote it, and rewrote it, handwritten.
Okay.
And then I finally got a laptop that had Word doc in it.
Okay.
Literally typed it up on Word doc.
Okay. And did you kind of lay it out in Word too with the photos and all that? Or did your publisher kind of put the book together? The
publisher did that. So when I submitted it to a few publishers, and each of them had different criteria as to exactly how they wanted it presented to them. So I sent it to Austin Macaulay just really basically wanted a rough draft. And then when I got the acceptance letter, then they got more in depth where, okay, now we want the whole manuscript. And then that's where the illustration stepped in. They said, we have illustrators. And I said, well, I did my own. So they asked me to send them to them. So that's how it all comes about with them.
Okay.
So yeah, you send it
Okay.
to them, and then it's a lot of back and forth
Okay.
and forth of, okay, proofread this, okay, proofread this, okay, you know, and you have to sign off. Yeah.
On it. Okay.
Yep.
This kind of leads me to a really interesting topic because, you know, I'm an indie author. I published myself.
Yes.
You're a published author with a publisher. So it's a little bit of like, we have two sides of the coin here.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very interesting topic because this is your first time, right?
Yes.
With
Yes.
Sassy. And so you have that experience. Me, I literally was like figuring this out over a 1.5 to 2 year time frame while trying to write Kyra of the North.
Yeah.
And I was like deer in the headlights pretty much. And then I kind of like figuring out, I did a lot of research online, a lot of YouTube. I found it super helpful. I ended up forming my own publishing company to protect myself.
You did.
And that's why I did it, to protect myself.
And I think there's pros and cons to both going published and going independent. I mean, for you, now it's 100% you.
Right.
It's 100%
That
yours.
is one benefit is like, it's me, but on the downside of that, it's me doing everything.
Exactly.
On your side, you have a company doing lift, really. Not all of it, but doing some of the major lifting.
So once I got through the initial process and, you know, the back and forth, I go into the production department, and then there was more back and forth with them. They were great. And then they finally said, okay, everything looks good. We're handing you off to marketing. And literally, marketing sends, I don't know, I think there was 50 things on there of, you know, how-to tips and what they were going to do and how I can also contribute to my own self-marketing and everything else like that. So in that way, it was really good. They did it all for me. Okay. I mean, they gave me a publication date. So November 8th came, and it literally, you could pull it up anywhere. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Walmart, eBay. It was there. They did the major marketing blast where you have to do all the groundwork yourself.
Yeah. And there was a lot of learning. I found out pleasantly working with Amazon, the big one. They actually make it relatively easy.
Which is good.
Yeah. And their tool sets are great. There was a little bit of a learning curve, but it wasn't bad. And then, you know, I didn't want to have 20 different logins for 20 different platforms. And I was trying to figure out how to do things. But one of the things I realized through my research, and that's one of the reasons why I want to have this podcast, is to try to help people out that might be like stepping out there. Like, okay, there's ways of doing this.
Absolutely.
So like, I would say sign up for Amazon if you want to self-publish. Do it with them exclusively in terms of like set it up. Now you could decide to say, I'm going to exclusively sell with Amazon, which gives you benefits.
Right.
For me, it was more about, I want distribution, and I don't like the idea of one company that runs it all. So I ended up setting up my business account with Amazon, but then I found another platform called Draft to Digital. And what they do is they allow you to push digital versions of your book to all the major platforms, including Amazon. Now they have a disclaimer. They're like, we recommend you just work with Amazon, but they will push it for you. So I got on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, worldwide distribution, libraries, all in with one click, basically. And it's a basically, they take a percentage of the sales, just like Amazon.
Correct.
Works.
Yeah.
They are only digital. They recently are starting to dabble into print, but they're not there yet. Amazon is great. And then the other beast, as a lot of people refer to them as, is Ingram Spark. They're the company or the organization behind all the bookstores.
Uh,
Bookstores
yeah, I don't
get
know that one.
bookstores get their books through Ingram Spark.
Okay.
So I have an Ingram Spark account, and I basically you do the same exact thing that you did with Amazon for their print. Is
Okay.
their only print, and you set it up. They're a little bit more challenging. They're very strict on certain things, which I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why can't I tag it that way or whatever? Just
Right.
small subtlety stuff where I was like, interesting. But that's up and running, and now they pushed it to Barnes Noble print for me. Like
Awesome.
on the next day, it was
Awesome.
out. And
That's great.
And one thing I do want to say is like the print on demand authorship, the print quality is really good. I mean, like this was an Amazon book, I believe, correct?
Yes.
So
Yes, I did get that.
And the difference between Amazon and Ingram Spark, there is none. They're almost the same. Barnes and Noble, if you decide to work with them for print on demand, they use the same printers as Amazon and Ingram Spark.
Yeah.
So
Makes sense.
it's like a network of printers. So that's just something that, authors, people that are looking to explore need to do. So what's interesting, you're talking about marketing.
Yes.
I'm not a marketer. I'm like figuring this out. That's part of the reasons I'm like,
yeah, I'm not really good at that either.
This podcast is to try to like help promote and support the organizations and the people that really are trying to get in there.
I think that's a great idea. So, yes.
But what has been some of the biggest challenges you faced in trying to get the word out?
The biggest challenge what I face is I'll send a letter. I've got a nice cover letter. I had many people proofread it and sent it out. I've sent maybe 50 to 60 cover letters out. I'm not hearing back from anybody yet. I reached out. I was telling you a couple weekends ago was my library reach out, sent out a whole bunch of emails to the children's libraries in local areas and beyond. It's hard to break in. But of course, again, I have a subject. Unless they look past the title, all they see is the word snake.
Okay.
Which is really hard. And I knew I was going to be up against that. So I've started incorporating a picture of the cover along with the email. So they kind of get a gist. It's not your typical snake book.
Right.
That really has been the biggest challenge.
You know what? The more I kept thinking about your book, the more it kind of reminded me of Curious George.
Oh, thank you.
In a little,
a big compliment.
In a little way, just kind of like how the stories were portrayed and curious. It has that little bit of a feel. And I read a lot of Curious George when I was a little kid.
Curious George.
So, but I agree with you. I think this industry itself is, you kind of have to know people.
I agree.
You might get the occasional luck.
Right.
I was super lucky because I went out literally on the blue. I went to my local library and I met the young adult librarian there. And I said, I'd like to donate a copy of my book if you would take it. And she just said, let's talk. And she just embraced me and my book like I've never expected.
Yeah.
I mean, she had a launch party for me that the library sponsored. It was absolutely amazing.
Awesome. Talking about your book, you know I read it.
You did.
I read it.
You did.
And it's phenomenal.
I'm glad you liked it.
It is not a genre I would ever have read. It's not in my wheelhouse to read something like this.
Okay.
It just doesn't interest me. But I said I would read it for you. And what a surprise. This book is great. Not only would I, some of the times I didn't want to put it down, you have what I love in books, those, oh, I didn't see that coming moments or reads, or it's just like, and you entice people to think as to where she's going on her journey and what is she going to find next, or what's around that next corner. And you played it out so well, and down to the last page, and I put it down and went, oh wow, he better start on that next book.
Well, it kind of leads in, I think, to my final question for this little interview is, what does 2025 look for you?
2025, I just finished up book 2.
Wow.
Yes,
Okay, it's January. I guess you're working on that beforehand.
I was. It actually came to me mid mid book on Sassy as to she can't just go on one adventure.
Okay.
So she goes on another one. So the title's going to be Sassy's Great Pretender Adventure.
Okay.
And again, it explores a whole bunch of snakes and their more unique qualities that they have.
Okay.
So the second book, again, is a teaching book, but in another very fun way.
So lots of drawing is in your future as well.
Lots of drawing is in my future. Yep. And I actually have a third book in my head, but I haven't even started on that yet.
That's the dilemma I find that even happens with me is you're working on something, but then you have these other ideas of other things.
So see, that's when a pad and a pen comes in handy, because that happens. I'll be on track for one thing and this little idea will pop into my head and I'll just jot it down.
I'll do like a quick voice memo, or I'll go right into Google Docs and just document it really quick. There's been a few times
You're better at that.
when I've like been in the middle of something or I'm stuck on a scene,
Right.
and I'm talking to my wife or a friend or something like that. Usually it's my wife, and all of a sudden I'll just go silent, and then there's nothing, and then all of a sudden my wife will look at me and be like, "You have an idea," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be right back."
That's good.
2 hours later, I come back down. I'm like, "Yeah, I fixed it, or I figured it out."
So what are you working on?
I am
25.
I am actually currently in the middle of working on the sequel to Kyra.
Yeah.
It came to me a couple weeks ago. Like
Okay.
I knew what her overall arc is,
Mm-hmm.
and I know it's going to probably be a 3-book trilogy.
Okay.
But for me, I was just like, okay, how do I kick it off? I didn't like the book ends in a certain way.
Correct.
But it's like, okay, what's next? You know, like
right.
And then I was driving home one day, and then it just hit me. I was like, that's how I can start it.
Nice.
And I just went upstairs, didn't say hello to anybody, and just started banging away on the keyboard, just kind of like outlining it really rough, like I 1, 2, 3. And then I was like, okay, that gives me the first 2 or 3 chapters, and then I can start building off of it.
And I think that's the hardest thing for any writer, is when you've written a book, and yours as is, it's great, good read, how to keep that momentum going and how to start that next book. Even with mine, although a children's book, I pondered a little bit how to get the next one going. I knew what my content wanted to be, but how to start it and make it flow from one book to the next. That's
yeah. So I would say the hardest part for this first book was the preface, like the prologue. So I've never written anything before in my entire life. I'm going to be very open and honest. I have a form of dyslexia where words get jumbled, not the lettering, but the structure of sentences. So it took me a while. I relied on a lot of people to help me. But I think I kind of rewired my brain a little bit doing it. So it's easier this time for me because I'm much more conscious of everything.
Okay.
But when I trusted like 5 or 6 people to read the beta.
Yep.
First draft, and what they ended up telling me was like, oh, I didn't realize this, or I didn't understand that part, or I wanted more of this. And the one thing that really so the general summary is like more detail, so I'm very conscious of that now. But the one thing that really stuck out was one of the beta readers was my mother, and she doesn't read fantasy.
Well, she's more,
but she reads horror.
Okay.
And all this other stuff. So it was kind of like interesting. talking to getting her feedback, but she didn't realize certain things. And she goes, I just need that little intro into the world. So that's where that prologue came from.
And let me tell you,
And that one took me 4 months for like a page and a half to 2 pages.
worth every day that you did on it, because that prologue, I was hooked.
So,
I read that and I was just like, oh, this is going to be good.
so it literally was like I had 7 versions of it, and I was like trying various things, and then again I'm in my car, I'm driving home, I'm pulling off the exit, and I'm like, oh, she's sitting in her window, blah 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 blah, and I ran upstairs and I wrote it and almost didn't touch it. I just left it as is.
Wow.
That's almost one draft, minus a couple little tweaks to grammar, making sure the words are okay.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. So I had my group of people read my book, and of course, again, even though it's a children's book, it's about snakes.
Right.
So I had a few of my girlfriends who are dedicated in this book, my gal pals, who I just mentioned the word snake and they will freak out. So I thought they were the best ones to read it, and I convinced them to read it, and they were like, "Oh wow, this is really good." So yeah, same thing. You get people who aren't usually, it isn't usually in their genre, because they're going to give you the most honest opinion.
Well, I knew the
and
people,
best feedback.
I knew the people that were going, that I gave the draft to read, and I explained it's still rough, but I'm really looking for really honest. And I knew the people that I gave it to they were not going to sugarcoat
Absolutely.
anything.
And that's exactly what I looked for.
And that's what I wanted.
Yes.
I mean, I went to art school. I can take their critique.
Yep.
Like I've had my art like ripped apart. So when they said, actually, I kept turning because I wanted to understand what was going to happen next.
See? Same thing.
They're like, we just need more. Like my older brother, huge reader, fantasy reader, Stephen King, all those books.
Yes.
He was just like, oh, you mentioned this character. I just wanted more of that character, or the character killing the character.
Yep. Okay.
So I took all that feedback and I disappeared for about 3 months, where I didn't do much of anything besides work and whatever I had to around the house. And I wrote and I added over 100 plus pages to it.
Wow.
So that's just one of those.
And I liked it. I loved the detail. I was able to form, which I love when I'm reading a book, is form the characters in my head.
Okay.
And the amount of detail you gave and everything made the characters all come to life. They really did.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So
yeah.
Well,
I enjoyed it.
I think we're going to wrap up this interview. So Nancy, thank you so much for meeting with me and talking about
Thank you for having
Sassy, the Green Tree Boa, and talking about your experiences with being a recently published author. Thank you again so much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right.